Hi there. This is the homily for the fourth Sunday of Lent. And what we noticed today, we ended up with Christ clearing the temple in last week's readings and essentially showing the preciousness of the law. Uh, what is going to happen in these readings is we're going to have the uh, Israelites once again ignoring what they actually have because of God, and consequently, their city is obliterated. They are taken off into slavery, and this slavery was to last for 70 years. So that's all in the first reading. And what is happening is we're being reminded of just how important Jerusalem slash the temple was for the Israelites because of its really unique bond with God, which gave the Jewish people a unique bond with God, which they then didn't exactly appreciate always. And consequently, you have the Babylonian captivity. And that all comes out of the book of Chronicles, which is our first reading. What happens at the end of this reading is that Cyrus, who is a Persian king, who finally beats the Babylonians, this is 70 years later than the start of the captivity, and he is inspired, and this is always a wonderful illustration of the way God's providence keeps on working even with people who are not exactly cooperating. But that tells us about providence as well, that everything that happens in our lives is connected with the providence of God. It's not to say God wills it in some positive sense, but He is making even the bad things that happen in the world because of sin. And yes, we are contributing to that sin, but even the bad things that happen are used, in this case, the captivity, are used to teach the people something. And outside forces, like the king of the Persians, who was by no means a believer in the single God of the Israelites, even he is moved by what is interesting, the importance of religion. And of course, today that is an incredibly important question, which of course we can't go into. But yes, religion is important for our humanity. Moving on, then, we go to the promise that he makes that he will actually allow them and finance, tell the local satraps, the Persian reps who are controlling the area, to give so much money for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. It's going to be nothing like the great temple of Solomon, for example, but it is going to be a place that will restore the notion of the temple. And so then people can start moving back to Jerusalem. So again, this importance, Jerusalem and temple. And now we come to the psalm which celebrates that importance. If I forget you, if I forget you, Jerusalem, let my tongue be silenced. So they're suffering in Babylon, first verse. They are asked for songs, which of course they wouldn't sing outside their own land because the songs are tied to temple worship. Then, how can we sing a song of the Lord in foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand be forgotten. So, in other words, in the mind of this psalmist, you have this idea that we have to be in Jerusalem to worship properly, make sacrifice in the temple. Uh, May my tongue cleave to my palate if I remember you not. if I place not Jerusalem ahead of my joy. In other words, if I literally displace Jerusalem and the worship that's tied to it, I displace Jerusalem from being the center of my life. Now, watch how this gets transposed by the coming of Christ. You have, first of all, the letter to the Ephesians, and in this text, Paul is explaining that Christ has brought us to new life, even when we were dead in our transgressions. And he has seated us with him in the heavens. And you have to understand a whole lot about the Eucharistic sacrifice to appreciate just what exactly that means. But basically, the heavens are open in the celebration of the Eucharist, and we join the heavenly liturgy. Liturgy is really the only language we have for describing heaven, because that's all God has given us, okay? There's no, quote, scientific, unquote, language that would supersede that at some point. Liturgy is a whole different space, a spiritual space in human life. And you either get it or you don't get it. If people's lives are obsessed with things and power and success and whatever floats your boat, it could be cocaine, it could be anything. But the point is, liturgy is what we need to be deeply human. And that's why John Paul II, for example, said cult is the center of culture, because they're so intimately tied together. You only have a substantial culture when you have a substantial cult. We could learn a lot about that in this country right now, but moving on. So he has saved us, and he did this literally. This came from him. It's a gift of God, Paul says. It's not from works, so no one may boast. So we can't just earn this. If I do these 10 things for the church, then I am worthy of salvation. Not a chance. If you're that presumptuous, you don't get what religion is. Moving on, we have Jesus Christ, created in Jesus Christ. We are his handiwork. In other words, literally, the centrality of the temple and Jerusalem for the Old Testament has been transposed. And don't forget, the Old Testament land will disappear, simply become part of the Empire of Rome, and the temple will disappear, and they will actually be blocked from going there. And of course, the temple will be leveled in AD 70 anyway. So what happens in these readings is we're shifted from an outside geographical, political sense of what is important for us to be true worshippers, and we are shifted interiorly by the grace of God. This is the first time the grace of God is mentioned, but what we have is that he has transposed this outside geographical description of worship into an interior experience as well. There are concrete elements that still remain outside of us because we forget things, and we need this concrete structure to remind us that in fact we are both spiritual and material. But anyhow, that's what Christ has done for us, moved us to the right hand of God in heaven. And now we have the Gospel of John, and here you have Jesus explaining to Nicodemus that he is going to die. In other words, we went from external concrete political worship, Old Testament, to the reading from Corinthians, interior spiritual part of worship, So, in other words, in the New Testament, the whole spiritual dimension of the human being, still with those external connections, has now been opened up by Christ. Now we're going to watch how Christ opens it up, or how he explains that he's going to open it up. And this is what happens in the gospel reading, uh, that he will be raised up. And then finally, you have this whole parable of the light and the darkness at the end. And that really clinches the whole stream of thinking of the texts, so that you have lightness being from God, light being something that is interior to us, assuming we actually worship God and love Him. Then we do what we do, our works in the world, by walking in that light. The light will be brought by the one who is going to be lifted up like the serpent in the desert, so that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. And that is the last point, that this light will ultimately carry us into eternal life, because it's a vast spiritual reality that we are getting prepped for in this world. Have a good day.